deep inside an absolute labyrinth of pitch-black volcanic caverns. In East Africa, a multi-ton bull elephant is systematically smashing its tusks into the solid rock walls, not out of anger, and not to clear a path, but to rip away chunks of mineral-laced stone and swallow them whole, driven by a primal hunger, so consuming that these massive creatures will risk blindness and suffocation in the subterranean dark just to taste a white powder that modern society leaves out on every diner table for free. This desperate underground pilgrimage isn't a unique animal eccentricity, because across the frozen pavements of North America, wild deer will risk stepping into traffic just to lick the chemical crust left behind by snowplows, while deep within the Congolese rainforests, wild primates spend their mornings wading through dangerous marshlands to selectively harvest specific riverbank weeds that taste distinctly of brine, all of them answering an ancient, non-negotiable chemical command that operates below the level of conscious thought. Your own body obeys this exact same primeval software every single time you instinctively shake a crystal mineral over a plate of food before your fork has even touched it, performing a silent 2-second ritual that connects you directly to a multi-millennial struggle for survival. We treat the white shaker sitting next to the pepper as a trivial piece of tabletop furniture, a cheap condiment to make a bland meal taste finished. Yet for 99% of the human chronicle, this exact substance was one of the rarest, most physically elusive, and most fiercely contested materials on the surface of the planet. Our ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years actively hunting for it, tracking its invisible traces across hostile landscapes, and dying by the millions whenever those traces vanished. Because our modern abundance is a historical optical illusion, the conventional narrative tells us that seasoning food was merely a luxury that appeared once early civilizations grew organized enough to build trading posts. But that tidy assumption completely collapses the moment you examine the raw evolutionary arithmetic of the human nervous system, showing that long before the invention of writing, long before the rise of the first pharaoh, and long before the concept of a government ever existed, human destiny was being quietly driven by a desperate, low-grade biological panic for a mineral our bodies absolutely require to stay alive, yet are completely incapable of manufacturing on their own. To understand why this craving runs so incredibly deep, you have to look past the tongue and journey straight into the microscopic architecture of your cells, where a continuous becomes most important. Invisible electrical storm is the only thing keeping you breathing from 1 millisecond to the next. Every time a neuron fires a thought through your brain, every time your heart contracts to pump blood through your chest, and every time a muscle fiber moves, your body is using microscopic sodium ions as a biological battery. Without a precise concentration of sodium dissolved in the fluids surrounding your cellular tissue, the entire electrical grid of the human body instantly shuts down. Your blood pressure plunges into a catastrophic spiral, the fluid balance maintaining your vital organs collapses, and your muscles lose their physical capacity to contract, leading to an agonizing death within a matter of days. Because the ancient ocean where all life originally evolved was saturated with sodium, the primitive organisms that eventually crawled onto dry land brought that internal sea with them inside their skin, creating a permanent biological dependency that turned the terrestrial world into an unforgiving desert of mineral scarcity. For the first 300,000 years of our existence, Homo sapiens possessed absolutely no industrial minds, no engineered evaporation pans, and no specialized clay vessels capable of keeping a mineral dry, meaning they were completely at the mercy of a landscape that hid its sodium in highly unpredictable, tightly clustered geological pockets. The evolutionary strategy for an early human foraging band was simple, yet brutally inefficient. You let the animals do the heavy work for you, observing where the migrating herds returned season after season, following their paths to hidden mineral springs, hidden salt licks, and sodium-heavy river clays, transforming the geography of animal hunger into the very first human map of the wilderness. This absolute dependence on the landscape introduced a persistent, low-grade evolutionary stressor that quietly shaped the social architecture of early human communities, particularly across the massive stretches of East Africa, where the local soil runs naturally low, inaccessible sodium. When a foraging group is perpetually running slightly undersupplied on a critical element, the biological alarm is constantly ringing in the background, transforming a simple mineral deposit into a high-value resource. That could mean the difference between life and death for the entire collective. High-resolution anthropological studies tracking resource sharing among early human populations have revealed a fascinating behavioral pattern. Easily replaced low-sodium resources like wild tubers or local plants were often consumed individually on the spot. But whenever a modern foraging band located a rare, high-value source of fat, honey, or mineral salt, the information was immediately made public and distributed freely throughout the entire group. Hoarding a salt deposit for oneself was an evolutionary death sentence because the overall survival of the breeding collective depended entirely on ensuring that every single member, from the nursing mothers to the young children, received an adequate share of that precious sodium. This deep cooperative instinct allowed a comparatively slow, weak, clawless primate to outlast the faster and stronger predators of the savanna, turning the shared consumption of earth and mineral licks into a profound mechanism for early human social bonding. Before the invention of clean, crystalline table salt, our ancestors had to satisfy this internal panic through visceral, primitive methods, often drawing their vital daily sodium straight from the warm blood and nutrient-dense organ tissues of freshly killed game. An ancient hunter, who had spent days tracking a large mammal through an arid valley, would butcher the carcass and consume the liver almost immediately while it was still warm, not out of savage ritual, but because the liver functions as a massive physiological reservoir for sodium, delivering a rapid, life-saving dose of the exact chemical their kidneys were desperately working to conserve. Modern studies tracking the remaining hunter-gatherer populations of the Kalahari Desert have revealed that their natural, completely unprocessed diet delivers a daily sodium intake that matches the exact, mathematically ideal target recommended by modern cardiologists for a healthy human heart. Achieving this perfect balance without a single scale, measuring cup, or salt shaker, simply because the natural food itself had not yet been stripped of its organic mineral balance by industrial processing. For hundreds of millennia, this wild, migratory balance worked flawlessly. Find the sodium, consume it from the meat or the earth, and follow the herds when the local supply runs thin. A natural rhythm that sustained humanity across ice ages and migrations until an epochal shift occurred that permanently broke the system and manufactured a global dietary crisis. That crisis was the sudden arrival of agriculture, an event that completely upended the human relationship with food and turned a manageable mineral scarcity into a chronic, widespread biological emergency. The moment early human populations abandoned their nomadic lifestyle to settle down and cultivate massive fields of wheat, barley, and rice, their daily sodium intake collapsed almost overnight. In evolutionary terms, domesticated cereal grains contain virtually zero natural sodium, meaning a population that derives 80% of its daily calories from cultivated crops is a population whose nervous system is chronically starving for the one element it cannot live without. Detailed skeletal analysis comparing pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers with early Neolithic farmers consistently shows that first agriculturalists were, on balance, drastically less healthy than their nomadic ancestors. They were shorter in stature, heavily prone to severe dental disease, and carried distinct bone markers indicating widespread nutritional deficiencies. While sodium deficiency doesn't leave a single, clean visual signature etched into fossilized bone, the way a lack of vitamin C might, the surrounding archaeological context makes the reality undeniable. By trading the diverse, meat-rich diet of the wild for the predictable calories of the grain field, humanity had accidentally trapped itself in a massive sodium deficit, turning salt from a casual environmental find into the absolute master key to human survival. Once deficiency became the default setting of the human condition, the groups that figured out how to physically manufacture and control salt became the absolute rulers of human destiny, a realization that has pushed our archaeological timeline of industrial production back to a staggering 8,000 years ago. Deep within the forested hills of northeastern Romania, at a historic site known as Lunca, researchers uncovered the shattered remains of a genuine, purpose-built salt factory that operated centuries before the construction of the first city, the invention of writing, or the rise of a central government. The early Neolithic villagers who managed this facility were not part of a vast empire, yet they had already engineered a highly sophisticated, seasonal system designed to boil the natural brine flowing from local mineral springs inside heavy ceramic vessels over intense fire pits. Crystallized sodium extracted through pure, repeated human labor. The sheer intensity of this ancient operation is written in the mountains of broken pottery recovered from the site, where hundreds of shattered ceramic fragments tell a vivid story of thermal stress, showing that the intense heat required to evaporate the water, constantly cracked the heavy clay pot, prompting the workers to continuously manufacture new vessels season after season, generation after generation. Chemical analysis of these ancient artifacts has revealed that the salt produced at Lunka did not stay within the village, its distinct sodium signature showing up at archaeological sites across a vast geographic territory, proving that long before the discovery of bronze, human beings had already established extensive, highly organized commercial trade networks dedicated entirely to the distribution of salt. This monumental transition was not an isolated European phenomenon, because on the opposite side of the planet, along the misty coastlines of ancient Peru, early communities were simultaneously carving out shallow, clay-lined evaporation basins into the earth to capture and concentrate seawater, using the natural heat of the sun to manufacture crystalline salt at the exact same moment in history. Meanwhile, across the vast northern plains of ancient China, separate populations were organizing massive seasonal harvests around the banks of large inland salt lakes, gathering naturally evaporated surface crusts to feed the expanding populations of the early Chinese agricultural heartland, when three entirely unconnected cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of miles of rugged terrain, all independent, arrive at the exact same industrial solution, within the same narrow window of time. It serves as an absolute scientific proof that the global environment had fundamentally changed. The rise of farming had turned salt into a universal commodity of desperate necessity, transforming the paths walked by early traders into the very first salt roads of recorded human history. As the centuries rolled forward, this pursuit of brine drove ancient engineers to achieve technological feats that seem almost impossible for their eras, most spectacularly demonstrated in the Sichuan region of ancient China, where workers eventually developed a highly advanced industrial percussion drilling system designed exclusively to tap into deep, subterranean brine deposits that the surface world had no other way to reach. Using nothing but flexible bamboo cables, heavy iron drill bits, and sheer human muscle power, these ancient technicians successfully bored deep vertical wells into the solid rock, reaching depths that would remain genuinely impressive by modern engineering standards, inventing the fundamental mechanics of deep well drilling centuries before comparable technology ever appeared anywhere in the Western world. Every subsequent civilization found itself forced to construct its entire economy around the control of this mineral, to the point where the Roman Empire routinely paid its legionaries a specific allowance of salt to ensure their physical endurance on the march, an ancient transaction that gave birth to the word salary that every modern worker still uses today. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt recognized sodium as the absolute center of preservation and purity, utilizing a naturally occurring sodium compound called natron to systematically mummify the bodies of their dead, embedding the mineral deep into the sacred religious architecture of their empire. This absolute biological desperation was the hidden engine behind the legendary trans-Saharan caravan routes, where vast lines of camels traversed thousands of miles of open, blistering desert dunes, hauling massive slabs of rock salt cut from remote desert mines to the wealthy trading hubs of sub-Saharan Africa, where the mineral was routinely exchanged weight for weight with pure gold. A wealthy merchant would look at a scale balancing a block of white crust against a block of precious yellow metal and consider it a perfectly fair transaction, because in a farming world isolated from the ocean, a pile of gold could do absolutely nothing to keep your heart beating or your neurons firing, while a block of salt could literally preserve your life, because every human body required it. Governments quickly realized that whoever held the monopoly on salt held absolute tyrannical control over the population, leading to the implementation of relentless, heavily enforced taxes that shaped the geopolitical landscape of the modern world. The notorious gabelle, a severe salt tax enforced with extreme brutality by the 18th century French monarchy, stood as one of the most despised instruments of royal oppression, fueling a popular rage that eventually boiled over into the absolute chaos of the French Revolution, when Mahatma Gandhi organized his famous 1930 Salt March across India, leading thousands of people to the edge of the ocean to gather their own minerals from the sea. It was never a simple protest about food seasoning. It was a profound, revolutionary strike against a colonial government that had dared to tax a basic biological necessity. A public declaration that the state had no right to commodify the very element required for human life to function. Then, in a brief flash of industrial history, the ancient scarcity that dictated the rise and fall of empires completely evaporated, replaced by mechanized mining, industrial vacuum evaporation plants, and global shipping networks that made salt one of the cheapest, most ubiquitous substances on the face of the planet. Today, the mineral that was once traded for gold is so completely inexpensive that it shows up invisibly inside almost every single item you purchase. At a modern supermarket, pre-added to our food long before the package ever reaches our kitchens. Yet, while the physical scarcity has vanished from the world, the ancient software running inside your body has not gone anywhere at all, because your kidneys, your brain, and your entire cardiovascular system remain strictly calibrated for the low sodium intake of a prehistoric hunter-gatherer. The deep neurochemical reward pathway known as the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system constantly monitors the sodium levels in your blood. And the moment those levels dip, it triggers a powerful release of aldosterone, an ancient hormone that commands your kidneys to frantically retain every single trace of sodium instead of flushing it away, while simultaneously flooding your brain with dopamine the instant you consume something salty. This neurochemical relief is not a metaphorical satisfaction. It is a direct, hardwired reward loop that evolved specifically to keep a slow primate chasing a rare, life-saving mineral across an unforgiving landscape, running exactly as it did 100,000 years ago, completely oblivious to the fact that there is a lifetime supply of salt sitting in your pantry. This primeval programming is so deeply woven into our biology that it manifests in a fascinating, widespread phenomenon known to science as geophagy, the deliberate, compulsive consumption of raw soil or clay for its specific mineral content. This behavior shows up consistently across an immense range of human cultures, appearing most frequently among pregnant women whose internal biology is desperately demanding extra trace minerals to build a new skeleton, and among young children living in developing regions where dietary sodium remains exceptionally difficult to obtain through standard food. Far from being a bizarre psychological malfunction, geophagy is a direct, living continuation of the exact same clay-eating behavior our ancestors relied on in dry riverbeds millennia ago, a deep evolutionary survival mechanism that never fully disappeared from the human species, but simply faded into the background as cleaner sources of sodium became widely accessible. The white crystals sitting inside the shaker on your table right now mark the definitive finish line of a grueling, 300,000-year search, a substance our ancestors first tasted in raw animal blood, scraped out of bitter river mud, and boiled for hours in fragile pots that were destined to crack under the flame. They built vast empires to hold on to it, paid for it ounce for ounce in gold, and launched bloody revolutions to take it back. So the next time you casually reach for that shaker without even looking, take a single moment to let that ancient craving breathe, because you are holding the absolute prize of human history, close enough to touch, completely unremarkable, and completely unforgettable.